Welcome, everyone. So glad to see you all here. This is our Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Visiting Tucker Boatwright Lecture by Dr. Debra Bergoffen, and we're grateful to the ANS Dean's Office for making Dr. Bergoffen's visit with us possible, and we're grateful to Nancy Probst, our WGSS Administrative Coordinator, for attending to all of the details for planning this event and making this gathering of us a reality. So thank you, Nancy. Because Dr. Bergoffen has been with us before in spring of 2018, perhaps you may have already been introduced. Perhaps you already know that she comes to us from American University, where she is the Bishop Hamilton Lecturer in Philosophy in the Department of Philosophy and Religion, that her research and teaching examine epistemological, ethical, and political issues from a continental feminist perspective, that she has joined us these past 2 spring semesters to infuse in our community and ways of knowing, being, doing, and relating an awareness of and commitment to abolishing gender violence. Perhaps many of you have been in her audience during her inaugural lecture last spring on comfort women, or her moderation of our panel, Getting It Right, Addressing Sexual Assault on Campus. Or perhaps some of you attended the Bought and Sold exhibit panel or toured the outdoor exhibit last spring that Dr. Bergoffen used her resources to bring to us. Or perhaps some of you were in her course last semester, The Shame of Sexual Violence, or her course this semester, Studying from a Feminist Perspective, Human Rights. Perhaps some of you attended Dr. Ellen Fetter's talk earlier this semester, which Dr. Bergoffen made possible for us, titled, What's Feminism Got to Do with It? Identifying Ethical Questions in Correcting Intersex Bodies. In all of these many ways, perhaps you have already met Dr. Bergoffen, for her impact on our community has been extensive and transformational. Some of her students from her course last year had this to say: anyone smart enough to attend a lecture or panel featuring her, that means all of you, will surely walk away with a new outlook on tackling the mammoth issue of sexual violence. Another student: her intellectual prowess is on display as she takes a philosophical and phenomenological approach to teach and discuss the concepts of shame, dignity, vulnerability, power, and gender. Another student: studying with Dr. Bergoffen makes you really understand that sexual integrity must be respected by all in order to protect the freedom of people worldwide. Another: Dr. Bergoffen is a pioneer in her academic career, and her groundbreaking work on the shame of sexual violence is an incredibly valuable asset to this university and its students. In general, her students describe her expertise and compassion shining through her work, and that being audience to her lectures energizes theory with praxis. And basically, as one student put it, and this is a quote, everything she says just blows your mind. No pressure. We're so grateful to have her guidance and intellectual leadership as we work in WGSS to meet community needs for the study of gender violence, its causes, effects, and means of resistance, as well as means of dismantling the very conditions of its possibility. Though adapted for presentation today, the paper you are about to be audience to has been published recently in the esteemed international journal The Humanities, Volume 7, Issue 3, September 2018. An issue that I was a special editor of, exploring the themes of possibilities and paradoxes of women, gender, sexuality studies, and cultural change. Our own Dr. McWhorter also has a brilliant essay in that special issue, so I hope you might all find time to read both in the future. For now, though, I'm eager for us to be audience to Dr. Bergoffen's talk, The Misogynist Politics of Shame, and to engage in a conversation afterwards with her. A final note before starting. For those in the audience involved in or attending the Civil Rights Richmond docudrama in the Maudlin Center Hartnett Museum, we will finish before 5:45 to allow time for all to traverse campus and get seated for the show. But for now, the pleasure is ours to be audience to Dr. Bergoffen.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. And thank you to the Women, Gender, and Sexualities program for inviting me here. It's been one terrific experience. This is a really warm and welcoming place, and I appreciate the way you have made me feel at home here. And also a shout out to the students who were in my seminar last spring, where I worked through so many of these ideas. So the title of the paper, The Misogynist Politics of Shame, I've divided it into 4 parts, so you know when we're getting to the end and you can say, oh, thank goodness. Okay. First part, the 2 faces of shame. Second, understanding shame. Theory, third part, from shame to debilitating shame. And final, concluding part, new beginnings, cultivating the I, we of shame. The 2 faces of shame. What counts as rape depends on the social and cultural norms of a society. Was it rape or a husband's right? Was it rape or seduction? Was her no really a yes? Was she drunk? And what was she doing there anyway? You know all the excuses. The rules of the game may change, but one thing does not. Once a woman accuses a man of rape, she is shunned as a liar and or depicted as a slut. She is made to feel ashamed of herself for letting it happen. She is accused of threatening his integrity, his career, his standing in the community. As her fault, the assault cannot be his crime. The personal shame that haunts a woman who has been raped, the shame of feeling that somehow she was responsible for the attack, that she deserved it, is one of the ways that sexist cultural values become embedded in a raped woman's psyche and then trap her in a misogynist politics of shame. The culture tells the woman the attack is her fault. Responding to this message, she shames herself. By erasing the guilt of the perpetrator, her shame becomes a tool in a social world that normalizes and legitimates sexual violence. Were this the whole story of shame, women would be at the mercy of this vicious circle, sexism. This is not, however, the whole story. Shame is a uniquely human emotion. It is tied to and triggered by threats to a person's sense of dignity and integrity. Insofar as my integrity can be threatened when I violate the values of my community, shame registers the fact that I exist among others and that their judgments affect how I see myself. I am not, however, a passive recipient of my society's judgments. As a person for others who is vulnerable to being shamed by them, I am also a person for myself who resists being degraded. Shame, by protecting me from undermining community values, also protects me from succumbing to social norms that denigrate me. Shame can come at me from two directions. One might be called the in the name of my community shame. The other might be called the in the name of my dignity shame. Coming from this second direction, I am ashamed of myself not because I have violated social norms, but because I have allowed these norms to degrade me. I know that we're not used to thinking of shame as playing a role in resisting unjust social norms. Hopefully, this talk will persuade you that so long as I allow myself to be treated shamefully, social norms that degrade me will remain secure. Once I become ashamed of myself for allowing these norms to denigrate me, these norms are in trouble. Looking at things in this way, the voices of METOO women who speak the language of Looking at things in this way, the voices of METOO women speak the language of the in the name of my dignity shame. By exposing the injustice of the misogynist politics of shame, METOO women and their supporters aim at creating a non-sexist politics of shame, where the two voices of shame, the social values that it endorses and the personal dignity it protects, speak to each other rather than at each other. Understanding shame. Psychologists who study infant and toddler behavior, and phenomenologists who describe us as intertwined with and vulnerable to each other, teach us that though what is considered shameful differs from one historical period and culture to another, the experience of and capacity for shame is built into the human condition. Emerging early in life, exactly when is a matter of dispute, shame remains a powerful force throughout our lives. It is often referred to as a moral emotion because of the part it plays in enforcing social, cultural, and political values, and because of its role in protecting a person's moral integrity. When cultural values reinforce a person's self-worth, social norms can count on the compliance of individuals. When they do not, shame as a force that secures the status quo can change sides. It can, in its role as protector of the self, become a force that defends the self against degradation by challenging accepted norms. Recent events speak to this Janus face power of shame. Women, previously silenced by norms that shamed them for being sexually assaulted, are now refusing to stay quiet, seeing their past silence as shameful to themselves. They are speaking up and speaking out. Some psychologists say that shame appears early in infancy before the self is formed. Others claim that it only appears later, between 15 and 38 months, after a sense of self exists. Whether they find that shame predates the emergence of a self and is integral to its formation, or that it announces the existence of an already present self, psychologists agree that shame and the self are intimately intertwined. As totally dependent on its parents and the norms they enforce, the child protects herself by shaming herself for violating them and obeys. Wishing to assert her independence, however, the child protects herself by shaming herself for succumbing to the demand to conform. As the child matures and becomes an adult, shame remains a powerful self-protective tool. By enforcing and legitimating social norms, it protects the self by alerting it to the cost of social alienation, the loss of love, ostracization, isolation. By reacting against norms that degrade it, shame protects the self's ability to affirm itself. What begins with the no's of the terrible twos, and if any of you have kids or younger siblings, you know this is just no, 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 no. That what begins with the no's of the terrible twos that seem to be arbitrary and capricious statements of independence flourishes in the rebellions of adolescence, where the 2-year-old's no becomes a critique of adult values. This process, whereby an incoherent no becomes an articulate, critical negation, follows Michael Lewis's observation that though children will unreflectively interpret the situation in accordance with the shame standards of their parents, adolescents and adults, having developed reflective capacities, may not. Thus, he tells us that shame is not caused by the specific situation, but by the way that it is interpreted. While the capacity to reflect on the meaning of a situation is critical for interpreting and reinterpreting it, shame plays a crucial role in transforming my reflections into actions. Once I interpret the situation as one that shames me, I will be powerfully motivated to change it. Where psychologists trace the emergence of shame to the biological contingencies of our premature birth, the fact that we're born well before we can sustain ourselves, and therefore our prolonged dependency. That is, psychologists trace the emergence of shame to our need to secure the love of those who determine whether or not we will survive. And that's not metaphorical, that's literal. Phenomenologists embed shame in the non-contingent human condition as existing as the embodiment of a consciousness that experiences itself both as an active agent at the center of the world and a visible body, among others, vulnerable to their power. Shame registers the fact, and here I'm quoting Merleau-Ponty, insofar as I have a body, I can be reduced, and reduced is the crucial word here, reduced to an object beneath the gaze of the other, and no longer count for him as a person. From this perspective, shame expresses a person's protest against being deprived of their status as a person. It is not a matter of being objectified per se. In many daily interactions, paying for my groceries, for example, being perceived as an object is experienced as acceptable and inevitable rather than shameful. I want that grocery line to just move along, so just treat me as a customer Tell me how much I owe you. Let me get out of here. The shame associated with existing as a material body is a matter of having my status as a person undermined by being reduced to and treated like an object, not just in the grocery store, but most of the time, if not always. Phenomenologically speaking, the sexual difference makes no difference when it comes to the matter of shame. Nothing can change the fact that women and men exist as perceivable material bodies who can be objectified and shamed by others, and as lived bodies, unashamed to express who they are. Patriarchy's misogynist politics of shame makes the sexual difference matter. It transforms the double truth of who we are into an ideology that bifurcates and sexes the fluid dynamic of the lived and object body. Fulfilling men's desire to escape the shame of being reduced to objects, patriarchy shifts the dangers of objectification onto women. It gives women hyper-visible bodies. Magnifying women's visibility, patriarchy ensnares them in the over-determined shame of objectification. Women's bodies are not objectified as just anything, however. To do the work of immunizing men from the shame of existing as material bodies, women must be objectified as women. That is, it is not the fact that women have bodies, but rather the fact that they are embodied as women. That shame becomes a sexed condition rather than a human one. This is what Simone de Beauvoir wants us to understand when she tells us that women are objectified as the sex. Shamed as the sex, women's sexed bodies mark them as shameful. From shame to debilitating shame. Some feminists have described this fixed shame, the shame that fixes women in and as a sexed body, as debilitating. Debilitating shame serves the politics of patriarchy by undermining and often silencing the for myself affirming voices of shame. It operates as an invisible violence that sets women up to believe that they deserve what they get when they are assaulted by the heard, seen, and felt violence of catcalls, a hostile workplace, sexual harassment, and rape. The work of debilitating shame begins early in a woman's life. It is integral to the ways that, in Beauvoir's famous phrase, one is not born but becomes woman. While boys are encouraged to see their bodies as sources of pride and power, girls are taught to view such vital expressions of their birthing bodies, such as menstruation, as unclean signs and as shameful, something to hide. Their developing breasts expose them to the salacious gaze of men. And now, as a mother of young sons recently complained, their butts are a problem too. and kind of worried. I'm wearing open-toed shoes, and I don't know when this is going to be really too much for men to bear. Instead of being taught to take pride in becoming a woman, instead of being taught to, in Beauvoir's words, to accept herself without excuses and without shame, the adolescent girl learns that as the subject of the objectifying gaze, again quoting Beauvoir, her sex condemns her to a mutilated and frozen existence. As one who is not born a woman but becomes one, she learns to endure her body and to see herself through the eyes of those who judge it. As one who is not born a man but becomes one, he is taught to assert himself through his body. Existing in the diverse materiality of their lives, women's debilitating shame and the ways it makes them vulnerable to ideologies that legitimate their degradation takes different forms. Women are never just women. We are always women of a specific class, race, religion, age, sexuality, and so forth. The point of speaking of debilitating shame and of showing how the being that transforms a girl into the mutilated and frozen existence of a woman is to indicate that our differences do not erase the fact that as women we share this. We will be demeaned as sex object bodies who deserve to be shamed and, if necessary, sexually assaulted, if we forget that only men have the right to define us. Hence, the global epidemic of violence against women. The white woman's race will not protect her from men's denigration and aggression. If she is judged to be attractive, she will be slammed as a dumb blonde. If she is deemed unattractive, she will become the object of body shaming. As a raced body, the black woman will be gendered as a hypersexed body that is asking for it. The Muslim woman will be shunned for submitting to the authority of Muslim men by not showing her face, hair, or body in public. One would think this deference would be applauded. The problem is that in deferring to the, quote, wrong men and refusing to become a spectacle for all men's pleasure, she is denying the, quote, right men access to her. This misogynist impact of debilitating shame is compounded by gender norms that blunt women's ability to deal with it. Men are taught that they have a right to be aggressive and violent. Invoking this lesson, they tend to react to being shamed with anger and or violence, emotions of potency and authority that assert their self-worth. Women are schooled differently. Taught to be submissive and obedient, women tend to become depressed when they are shamed. Rather than assaulting the codes of patriarchy that demean them, women tend to demean themselves for not living up to the codes. The time when the power of debilitating shame could be counted on may now be up. New beginnings, affirming the I, we of shame. Everything about shame speaks to and of our vulnerability. The vulnerability of being seen and judged by others. The vulnerability of being neither self-sufficient nor autonomous. Shame announces the fact that the dependency inscribed in our premature birth is, as phenomenologically given, never outgrown. It is the fact that it announces the fact that my I is a part of a we. The singularity of my presence in the world is tied to and supported by a community of others, excuse me. The singularity of my presence in the world is tied to and supported by a community of others upon whom I depend. Endorsing shared values, supporting social norms, and participating in political institutions are some of the ways that we materialize the I, we of our lives. Shame is the price we pay for threatening the security of the we anchors of our existence. Shame is not, however, the robotic servant of these social world structures. It is the voice of a dynamic emotion that protects the integrity of the self as it faces itself and as it faces others. It alerts the self to loss of dignity when it fails to live up to the ideals of its we. It defends the I against denigration when it interprets we ideals as degrading. As an emotion that operates at the intersections of self and others, self is an affect that registers the emotional element of the phenomenology of being for others and being for myself that is inscribed in the vulnerability inherent in being human. From this perspective, shame may be subjected to phenomenological criteria for judging the diverse norms it is called upon to serve. Do these norms protect the porous boundaries between the self and its others that fosters the vitality of their intertwining? Do they create spaces for an ongoing dialogue between the dignity of the I and the integrity of the we? Can they be invoked against deformed norms of a we that threaten the dignity of the I? Will they resist an authoritarian I who attempts to destroy the community of the we? Seeing the current METOO movement through these phenomenological criteria, it should, I think, be judged on 2 counts, or at least 2 counts. 1, whether it accurately identifies the institutional sources of the invisible violence, of the debilitating shame that stalks women and undermines their sexual integrity. 2, whether it fosters the conditions that enable the I-we dialogue of shame to emerge and thrive. As a movement that upends current sexist shame dynamics, will METOO put an end to debilitating shame or merely relocate it? Will the privilege of speaking out be reserved for women of privilege? Or will women marginalized by their race, class, religion, and so forth also find it safe to come forward? Will the impact of being abused, of being identified as an abuser, become a catalyst for reconstituting sexist norms of masculinity? Or will it become the impetus for perpetrators to find ways to avoid getting caught? As a movement that says no to degrading and debilitating shame, METOO's success in undoing the misogynist politics of shame will depend not only on the way that it holds those who assault women responsible for their moral transgressions and legal crimes, but also on the ways that it is heard as saying yes to the gift we give to ourselves and each other of affirming the dignity of our sexual integrity. Saying and listening to this yes requires resetting our understanding of the harms caused by sexual violence, without losing sight of the personal suffering endured by those subjected to sexual abuse. We need to see that by transforming the pleasures of intimacy into a source of fear, pain, and shame, sexual violence destroys the trust that by tying us to each other is vital to the life of the communities within which our lives unfold. Thank you. Happy to take questions, comments. No ripe tomatoes, please. Please.
Thank you very much for that analysis. It's really important. This is just a question. You said that there is an essay by that talks about how shaming young queer kids, particularly boys, she's got preference about how that creates a sense of distance and self that actually eventually can empower gay men. I wonder if you've heard that. I said, you see her, if you have, you see her analysis.
I do. Because what I think she's working on there is this protective function of shame. That you get shame, and at a certain point, and it's who knows when, right? It's totally unpredictable. But at a certain point, you say, enough. That's what I'm calling that self-protective. You rebel, you revolt against that self-destruction and pushback. And there are analyses that show that there's a real relationship between shame and pride. Right? And so the point at which the shame becomes a no to those who shame me could be understood as taking pride in myself. This is who I am, and deal with it. So yeah, I do see this. Yeah. Please.
It's related to a question I had. Can we say then that there is really no place, or there's no moment without shame? If it's something you spoke of, sort of the childhood emergence of shame comes at a certain moment in very young age, right? But is that true for all people? In a sense, it's something that's part of what makes us human, and then how we respond to that is really where that difference between pride and shame occurs.
So much of the material I'm reading links shame to our humanity. I don't want to push the point that it's a uniquely human emotion because too many people with dogs and cats tell me that they are ashamed. The dogs and the cats, not like pet owners. So, and I don't know if we're anthropomorphizing or not when we do that. I just don't want to get into that. But insofar as shame as humanly expressed, what I hear all the psychologists saying and the phenomenologists and some of the people who are now doing neuroscience, it is just built into the human condition, the capacity. Whether or not we always feel shame, no, I don't think we do. But our sense of self is so tied up with the capacity to be shamed and to feel shame. Those two things. And that, if you're coming from a psychological perspective, you're saying, just look at Kim. Look at me. Look at. If you're coming from a phenomenological perspective, it's that doubled being a lived body, being a material body. So I'm inclined to buy into that it's particularly human, which doesn't mean it can't exist in other animals, but when human beings experience it, it's tied to a sense of integrity and dignity. And so I don't, is that an answer? I'll take it. Go, please.
I was looking at the same. I felt sort of pessimistic when we got to the questions that you posed at the end. Essentially, it's looking to sort of the end of sexual violence and so forth. And with the statement that women or girls really are learning shame well before any of those experiences even happen, it almost seems like we could address the shame surrounding sexual violence specifically, but that's a symptom of the larger issue.
Yeah, the way in which is the, you know, can we begin or have we perhaps begun raising our children differently? I think boys are being raised to express themselves through their bodies that for the most part is so healthy. Just not necessarily when it heads into the violence part, but boys are really taught to be proud of their bodies. You know, Beauvoir talks about the urinating game with blood, right? I don't know of any girls playing a menstruation game. I bled more than you this month. Right? So, you know, I think it's absolutely crucial how we're raised. I don't think the way in which we're raised necessarily determines the kinds of adults. That's why I love the 2-year-old. Not when they're in my house, but and the adolescent. Because the rebellions come from women and men who have been socialized in this sexist way. Rebellions are coming from, we're not determined, I want to say. So I'm agreeing with you, and I don't want to be totally pessimistic. Yes?
So I was interested in what you're calling the protective power of shame. And so, you know, you have so much of it that you kind of rise up or push back. And I'm wondering about maybe why you or that should be attributed, if that positive term should be attributed to shame, or if you consider or that there might be some other positive force that comes in to counteract the shame. Because this makes it seem almost like so roundabout that if you have to be shamed so deeply that you finally protest, it's a long way to come around to self-assertion, you know?
I I'm seeing shame as really positive here.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. So you're not seeing it as some other positive thing that comes in to counteract it. I just wonder if you
The
can see it.
positive thing is my sense of dignity, integrity, worth. That's the positive thing. And I do think, I think we all have that. I just do, you know? And that's positive. And when that is being affirmed, great, right? When that is being attacked, then we become ashamed of allowing ourselves to be assaulted in that way. So I see that as really a positive thing. That's why I keep using this word protective. It's protecting me. So when when it stops me from violating social norms, it's warning me there's a price here and you better be willing to pay it. It has to be important enough for you to pay this price. And when we look at things like sexism, when we look at things like slavery, and we can go down the list of people who endure abuse and terror for long periods of time and then enough. So I just, it's kind of, you can't do that to me. Please. I wouldn't have called anything.
Thank you. Make sure to take that. I'm thinking about Renee Brown's work on shame and vulnerability and so forth, and it's been a while since I've read some of it. So I don't remember the specifics, but I recall that she said that shame and guilt are two emotions that actually don't facilitate some sort of action. They're not good motivators. So I don't know if you engage with her work at all. Renee Brown, she's a, I think
Yeah.
okay. I don't know what she says does motivate you, but I do recall that she says that shame and guilt are they're a good way to get something to not move. They are sort of more of an hindrance than it is a motivator. Debilitating, yeah.
And that's the debilitating shame.
Okay.
It'll get you stuck. And so,
So when is it? I missed the fact that it's positive the way you're arguing. So what's the part that motivates?
can start all over.
No! I think I was with you with the debilitating and so forth, and I was hearing very much a negative, like it weighs you down, it's shaming.
There is nothing good about debilitating shame.
Right.
Okay? What I'm trying to say is, people who are studying shame look at this emotion from the perspective of what is it doing in the young child's life, the adolescent's life, and the adult's life. And if it is operating in what I would call a normal way, and I've got normal in quotes and italics and all that other stuff, but just for short,
Right.
then it's going to be a mobile kind of emotion. Sometimes it's going to get me to conform to social values. Sometimes it's going to get me, this is that business of how am I interpreting the situation? Okay. Am I interpreting it as something that is good for me? Am I interpreting it as something that is self-destructive? And so I'm using self-destructive, something that makes me ashamed of myself. Debilitating shame takes advantage of the power of shame to degrade. It takes advantage of it. And it is an abuse of shame. And that's what I want to insist on. It's an abuse of shame. And that abuse, ironically or interestingly, it's going to be defeated by shame-based and pushback. Shame's going to push back. You don't know when, you don't know. I mean, people endure debilitating shame for a long time. Perhaps think of it. Shame is the experience of self-betrayal. And then the question becomes, which self is being betrayed, the social self? Or the particular self? But that might do some work. Shame is a feeling, is an experience of self-betrayal. I'm ashamed of myself because. I think of McCarthy. Stopped it dead in its track. Have you no shame? It took a long time, a lot of people suffered. So that would be the positive. Jerry?
I'm not sure if I can make this completely clear, but to put it very simply, and I'll elaborate just a little bit. We human beings, do we need philosophy to liberate us from shame?
Oh my God, I hope so.
Well, I mean, is it the key to liberate us from shame? What I mean by that is something like this. Cultures around the world, impose shame on their inhabitants for many, many different reasons. I mean, you focused on the sexual and gendered one, but there are many, many cultures, where men get shamed for showing cowardice or weakness, etc. At what point in history, development of culture, does it become possible to do the sort of thing that you're talking about? That is to turn the standard around and ask, but should I really be ashamed of this? And wasn't that what philosophy did? I think of the Greeks and Plato, for example. No, you don't have to be ashamed. What's truly good, right? Do we need philosophy? And I talk about philosophy in the very broadest sense, not some technical, professional field here.
There are two people in this room who really almost know what I'm going to say based on some readings we've been doing. In order to feel shame, well, let me do it two ways. If I am embedded in a culture such that my identity is inseparable from the values of my culture, my belonging to that culture, one, I will not feel degraded by the values of that culture because I will have not separated my sense of dignity from the values of my culture. So in that situation, the only shame that will be operative using this kind of language is the in the name of my community shame, upholding. Okay. So supposing I hear your question as, and I'll go back, I'll head to Socrates. Okay. Do I have to have developed a sense of self that allows me to see myself as not simply as a member of a community, but as someone who can step back from that community and evaluate it. So that Socrates comes along and says, that's not exactly ethical, guys, for which the culture said, okay. So if philosophy is that move by which a critical distance becomes possible, then I'd have to say yes, because this distinction depends on being able to distance, to step back from and evaluate what's going on. I think religion can do that. You know, God said, and you said, and I think we've got a disjunct here. We have a presidential candidate saying to a vice president, you seem to think I'm in trouble, but it's your God who did this, so maybe you need to think things through better. So I think it might be the best I can do on this short. Yes.
I'll tag on to Gary's question and say, does philosophy, in its attempt to wedge this distance between the self and the cultural norms that are trying to debilitate the self, does philosophy need rhetoric to recognize the tropical dimensions of discourse? That these norms of shame that are debilitating are a discourse that are rhetorically constituted. So to me, it seems really hard for a self that has been debilitated by shame to rise up with full ontological power and be stop. It might be a little easier for a debilitated self to go, I see that rhetoric as a rhetoric. I wonder. So, thinking of Hayden White, developing a metacognitive awareness of discourse as discourse is what allows us to judge when a discourse is genuine. And if we can't judge it as genuine, we shouldn't live in accordance. We shouldn't live in that trope. So, you could have guessed I was going to go there.
Yeah, but I'm going to push back.
Go ahead.
Where do I get that capacity to judge the discourse? Even think of it as a discourse.
Because you're audience to it. You might not even be audience to yourself if you're debilitated by shame. Where does that self emerge from to get the wisdom to say, stop? Just exhaustion? Possibly. But exhaustion can also just lead to the death of the self, like actual debilitation, where you could never rise up and say stop. But when you're audience to someone saying shame, shame, shame on you, you hear it, you feel it, and you can say, wow, they're really talking their talk here. Boom. There's all of a sudden a wedge of distance between yourself and the truth content of their, proposition.
I agree with everything you said, and I don't, but pushback is, where did I get to say, wait, I got to have a self to make that, I have to have an awareness of a self to make that move. So I don't want to separate the two out.
We can keep that conversation.
I'm sure we will. Yes, yes. Yeah, I know it's come and go.
We have another minute. I would love to ask another question.
Okay.
Or someone else was, I'm sorry. Bob, you were going to ask. You go.
Yeah, I was just trying to,
This is my husband. I'm terrified of what's going to happen. Go.
you made one sort of shame sound bad and the other one good if it led to action. But it seems to me that in order for that shame of the self and saying, I need to take action to protect my integrity, and you also mentioned there's a rationality to that feeling that you can take action. And to me, the rationality is dependent upon a society that may, in fact, give you some justice. I think if you're in an entirely repressive society and you know that if you speak out, there's no chance that anything good is going to come from it, you're not going to speak out. I think the METOO movement has resulted from the fact that women and other minorities feel that there is now a chance, maybe slim, but they think there's a chance now that they're going to get justice, which is dependent upon institutions.
I'm wrestling with when did that shift happen, and Mary Ellen and I were talking about, well, she actually just pointed out that part of what sort of facilitated what we see now is that these are white, cis, wealthy women that are coming forward and so forth. And you have Debra Bergoffen, who, I mean, she is using this language a decade ago. Oh, and now we're talking about it. But if it is, I think this is to Mary Lee's point, when do we get that? Well, someone has to go first. In order for that sort of collective consciousness to rise, and I don't know when that happens. If you take a sort of pessimistic view, when was there a person or enough people who said enough is enough, that now we're having this conversation about METOO? I don't know.
Well, I think I wrestled with it because I keep thinking, for whatever reason, relating practical terms, you know, in terms of like what happens with a girl who's 8 and black, brown, living in Islam in any Latin American country, whose sense of integrity is non-existent because it's been destroyed from the moment she's born. Then I can see there debilitating shame turning into reality. And wrestling with that part.
I think that is the toughest. And part, at least if I can believe what I hear, part of what's going on in this movement is social media. The ability to speak anonymously. And then someone else responds. And then, oh, so I'm not alone. This is not just me. And so you get community.
That's true, but it's still true that the migrant woman goes in the border to this rate as soon as she steps on American soil will never, even with the news movement, because she can. Absolutely. And I'm with you. So it's making me think of shame in other ways that I haven't thought about. I just wrestled with that. Well, therapy, nothing to talk about shame.
I hope I didn't make it sound like it was.
No, not at all. No, it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, and I think about women migrating who know if they want to get in that caravan, if they want to get across the border, well, the cost is very and are they going to say anything? Absolutely not. So that the trade-off,
that we're hearing. It's coming on all over the place. The privileged women don't have to pay for their lives or their livelihood to the other. And so that's what I agree with.
I don't want to move too quickly to the question of joining another. I'm going back to Cedric now. And I'm not sure I remember the essay very well, but it's been a while. But one of the things that seems to me that's important in shame is the abandonment that happens. The person who is shamed is abandoned. And that can be temporary or it can be permanent. In the case of gay kids, it's sometimes pretty permanent. And for some women who are sexually assaulted, particularly in some cultures, but in lots, they're abandoned too. And to be abandoned is not to have another community to go to, but to just be abandoned. And if you don't die from that, people do. If you don't die from that, you're thrown back on your own resources, whatever they are. And that may not turn into resistance. That may not turn into anything that's terribly positive, but the first thing it will be is a suspicion of everybody else. And that suspicion is at the same time a recognition of oneself. And suspicion permits more and more of a distance, and a distance that the shamed person can modulate to some extent. So it seems to me that it's the abandonment that creates the possibility of self-recognition, the possibility of a continued distancing that's somewhat under the shamed person's control. And in that, that's what creates the possibility of some positive action, finding them in the community, so on and so forth. But it doesn't necessarily mean that will happen. Is that?
And that would bring us back to now I can teach.
Which I may not be able to do because I don't have the ability to articulate anything, but at least in my own mind, I'm thinking, you're not all you crack yourself up to be. You're dangerous, right? And it's not just, oh, this wonderful community that I wish I belonged to still.
And that sense of abandonment, the fear of that sense of abandonment is what keeps people in communities that are the kindest way I can say it, unhealthy. To have the courage to face that is enormous. And yet I think that's about, okay, I have to take my stand here. This is who I am. So that passing is, I'm abandoning myself and I think Thank you. Thank you very much.